Welcome back, everyone. As I'm sure you've all been watching all of our amazing videos, we're covering a lot of different topics. If you're not tracking all those, we've started adding topics that are not as popular, but we think deserve time and attention. We kind of walk through those, and we sort of slide into like what's important or valuable for your personal application, your personal life. It's called AI in real life. And I think that if you improve yourself, you bring that into work as well. But one thing that's been coming up a lot, and that Larry actually did a lot of research on to bring in some topics, that is about the affordability of AI and analyzing the affordability. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of changes. It may or may not have happened to you at your workplace where we're using a whole lot to do a lot of supposedly great things, I would hope. But then someone somewhere gets the bill. And now we got to have tough conversations. So what we're going to do is walk through what does that look like to be thinking about the affordability, the costs involved with AI, what type of work, why this matters, what you can do about it. But keep watching what we're talking about, because I think what we need in this space is a lot more clarity, some structure, some tools even that might be of help to you, because this will become only more important as we watch this continue to grow. And these changes where AI, these different companies are starting to monetize this, and those free days are over. Larry, something piqued your interest in your mind and brought this topic to bear. So maybe you could comment where this came from, why it was on your mind. Any thoughts before we begin the whole walkthrough?
Yeah, first of all, my attention was drawn to a article. I think it was in Wired. I'm not sure. It's one of those things you read real quick and kind of forget it. But then I made a mistake of going for a walk after I read it. And I kept working on my head, going, you know what? I have a feeling that the curtain's going to fall on you saying to find out where you're going to go to lunch. Because in this report, there was some, and it referenced the Forrester research report on AI spending, and the numbers were staggering. And I was thinking on my walk, if I wasn't CFO, I would be seething right now, smoke coming out my ears and all kinds of stuff. No, we can't do this because the promise of AI was going to bring down costs.
Yes.
And when you get the bill, and the bill that this Forrester research report talked about was just, are you kidding me? Bring down costs? Please tell me that again.
Yes.
The numbers don't match up. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, as you can see, the big AI companies are going to go public, and it's well known. And maybe if you've got a lot of money to invest, you're already going, well, let's see here, who's the best one. Yeah, I'll let you discover that on your own. But the whole point is, when it comes time to formalizing your business and you're going to go public now, that means you got quarterly statements. You're going to have to make projections. You're going to have, all of a sudden, the finances become super important. And then you see Claude just recently trying to refine its pricing on one of its SDKs, and then they had to walk it back because they had so much pushback. But I can tell you this, if you look at the .com boom, somebody's going to figure out an Amazon Plus subscription somewhere. Somewhere it's going to balance out. And like Scott, like you just said, the free days are over. So where that price point falls, we don't know. However, there's a bunch of stuff we can do right now to keep our CFO from getting really upset.
Right.
And some of that we can talk about now.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're highlighting that. You might be thinking, well, what do I care if they're going to raise the prices? And we're just doing our work and we're using AI. It's doing great things. To Larry's point, there will be some reaction from finance. And we've seen this plenty of times where if they don't clearly understand the value proposition for why they're spending money, right? So spending money on a lease for a building, that's super evident. They might argue with spending money on discounted lunches or free lunches. They might argue and push back on what premium level of coffee you get in the office. They are the bean counters. And when these things don't make sense, their default answer will be no. You've got to justify why it makes sense. I think there's a lot of developers who are out there, and I'm a previous developer, I get it. We're there to do our craft. We're not worried about what the bean counters are doing. But the problem is, if we don't, and we're already starting to see this, they will pull your licenses. They will limit it. Here's the worst case scenario, Larry. They're going to say, well, it's supposed to be saving money. How? Oh, it does the coding for us? Well, since we're spending so much, we're actually already behind on letting go of people then. That's what I would do, right? If I had to choose between AI costs that seems equivalent with employee costs for engineers, I'm going to cut the engineers. Why? You've got HR issues, you've got potential lawsuits, you've got workplace management things you got to deal with, attitude, all that kind of stuff that AI does not give you, and people are talking about it. So my friends, don't let it become a factor for them to start like, well, let's look at these costs. And they're looking at two line items. They're looking at Claude and they're looking at Jim Bob on your team. So let's walk through some of that. And Larry, you're going to kick us off because it begins with mindset, right? And there's a couple of things we want to walk through on this mindset people should be bringing in as they look at this issue about the cost of using AI for development.
Yeah, the first one is set an AI budget. No, you're going to go, gee, thank you. But okay, so let's step back a little bit because there are price per tokens, right? And you can if you want to. And I don't want to encourage anyone to get caught up in what I call the credit card game. Where you get one credit card and you put some money on it, and then another credit card goes, oh, it gives you even better. So you transfer, you do your balance transfer. So you get caught in this credit card balance transfer game. I've never played that game, but I can see where you would very quickly lose track of where's what. And of course, you don't want to do that. However, there are certain models that are less expensive and possibly even better at certain tasks than other models. And so I'm thinking here in connection with setting your AI budget, I want to encourage you to think beyond just one model, but think multiple models. And yes, I get it. I can hear the moans already, Scott, and we haven't even published the podcast here. Right? No, please be patient. It'll get easier as we do this. But I just want to encourage you to set that budget and find out what tool is best for what task.
Yes.
And so embrace that and give it some thought.
So without that, the default will be you're going to treat whatever AI you're using like an expensive consultant. So are we using the consultants the right way? And this is classic, and I've been around a while, and Larry's been around a while. We've seen this. And the biggest pain point for me is when they bring them in, like, well, here's all the consultants, and they're going to bill us 40 hours. They're not going to bill us for the work that they did. They're going to bill us for 40 hours. And you'll start to see them like, why do we have 7 of these consultants in this meeting about what we should do for the kickoff or the celebration lunch? They're going to bill 40 hours. So it will cost you every time you ask it questions. Are we asking it the right kind of questions? You try to have this more judicious. One thing might be even easier to add on to that, treat it like it's a senior level architect. And just like we break down our work for delivering a project, we're not going to say, okay, and I had the senior architect go through and review the reports for any typos. That would be really not a good use. Like, obviously based on skill set, but AI has the same levels of different skill sets, but it costs you more. When I'm doing like pure consulting projects, we literally would slice out those people's times depending on those roles because some were simply more expensive than others. So we're trying to really watch that spending. So I think it's the same thing. 1, default, it's an expensive consultant. 2, what are they doing? So clarify the reason. Now, when Larry's saying something like, there's a lot of different models, we should consider that. This might begin, I think, a good conversation with your governance committee or your governance group, but also probably the AI enablement team or committee there as well, because we might simply say, these are the tools we're allowed for security reasons. It doesn't mean the others aren't secure. It just means like, we don't think it's worth the effort. We already got an AI tool. Why would we need more? I don't get this as Microsoft's, right? Come on, which is fair. But when we walk through the different things that they're good at, there's definitely a lot of the tools that are really good. All you have to do is ask developers, what's your go-to AI? They're going to say Claude. They're going to say Claude. Now, Copilot is not using Claude behind the scenes, it's using OpenAI, but they are now opening that up. So you might see that change. When I say clarify the reason it's there, think about what you hope to get from it. And then, does this make sense for what we're using it for and what that spend might be? And I think in the end, what we're doing is we're trying to treat these more, it's a level of intelligence we have to add to the thinking as a development team, just like you would, like, who's going to pull this work, who's going to do that, but a bit more because you're now trying to think of their cost. I know devs don't normally think of the cost, but right now, Larry, no one's thinking of the cost. If I look at who's watching over the AI costs, and I know you'll get into this, there isn't someone that gets assigned that. The PMs don't understand this aspect of AI. Your devs are saying, that's not my job. The engineering manager is more watching over the resources as people, and maybe who's got licenses to Claude or CoWork, et cetera, but not this level of cost for the work that we're doing. So if we can start thinking, you guys are closest to the work if you're on the dev teams, you're thinking about what am I expecting us to do? Why are we even using AI? And if there's a cost benefit for using AI, it's faster, maybe it's cheaper, maybe it can automate it. Then let's start to carve out that kind of thinking instead of this the one size fits all. We use AI or we use Claude. For what? For all the things, right? If we can add that work, you're doing yourself a service for a little bit of thought work and a conversation with the team to go back to what I said at the beginning of this piece, that we don't inadvertently shock finance and have them get into a reactionary mode where now they're going to make some decisions. My friends, they have budgets and we're going to surprise them. And those budget walls aren't going to really flex or they're not going to be happy about it, right? That's just their world. and they will make decisions. And how many times have we seen them, Larry, make decisions like, ooh, that was kind
Oh,
of,
yeah.
that was rough, right? But they're going to make decisions. They only have so much information. Let's help them by starting to think on behalf of, because I don't know who else would be doing it.
Exactly. I totally agree. There's another issue here, and we bring this up often in our AI for Scrum Master and Product Owner courses. And it's the idea that AI augments the human person and doesn't replace them. It augments human work. So keep that word work in the forefront of your mind for a moment. The initial idea was don't worry about your jobs, because really, I think the way it's going to pan out is, and we've mentioned it on the podcast here a few times, it's going to help you, but it's not going to really replace you. Now, having said that, of course, we know that's not entirely a blanket statement that one could fairly make. There's an issue here that goes a little deeper. And the question is, if AI is here to help me, to augment my work, then what can I do best? And what can the AI agent do best?
Right.
Okay, and so I can pick up the phone and make the reservation for the team lunch. Don't have to ask ChatGPT to do that. And there's a lot of other work that I can do where I don't need an AI agent. But if it's going to save you time, by all means. If it's going to dig deeper and help you research better, yes, by all means. And so
Mhm.
in your mind, when you're working with your AI agents or agents,
Yes.
be thinking, what can I do best? And where do I need the help? Where do I need somebody to augment here in this thing? So think of it as your assistant. Scott mentioned expensive consultant, but it's almost more than that. In many cases, at least the way I've experienced it, it's more of an assistant. But
Yeah.
I ask the assistant to do the things that I can't do or can't do as quickly. So keep that in mind when you're trying to be a little bit more wise about AI usage.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. And there's some parts where I'm using it this year where it's like an advisor, and that's been tremendously helpful. So back to that point, it doesn't replace the humans, but boy, it's a wonderful complement for some of the work that we do. That, for example, for me, it's some things that I am not good at. We might have talked about this before in previous podcasts. So if we look at the dev cycle itself, and for the friends that are in development, or if you're a product owner, if you're a project manager, we've walked through this 1,000 times. What are those classic phases of software development, of your SDLC? Now, Agile changed a lot of that from capture all the requirements to capture some. But if you just do that basics, I'm going to go to the basic, not because I think this is the best, but I'm just trying to get us all on the same page. You have your requirements, you gather the requirements, verify requirements, get sign off perhaps. Then you figure out your design, make sure it's a good fit. Someone else is going to weigh in on that. Now we actually do the development, and then we get into testing. And we might do other things like security checks, or even when you're doing design, we're actually looking for things like scalability, modularity, can we reuse these components, all that kind of work. And we're starting to see a lot of complaints about AI built this and now someone takes it over and doesn't fundamentally understand it. And we'll walk through some of that. But just those phases, when you ask AI about its recommendations for which models are best at these different phases, and then Larry and I were just walking through this, just for that basic 4 phases I was giving, 7 different models were recommended. Everything from use Gemini to consume the requirements. Obviously, you're using Claude for development, but you're going to use Opus for the architecture. You might use Sonnet for the dev. You might use DeepSeek for some verification, right? Something else for the security checks. Now, we were laughing because like, who all is doing that? Like 7 different models. But Larry made a good point. Maybe not now, but soon in the future, because that cost, Larry said at the beginning, these companies are going to go public. And if you haven't noticed, these are the biggest IPOs ever. Look at what
Yes.
SpaceX's first move was with all that money. They buy Cursor, right? It's all about AI, and they're going to make money from it. They're going to be responsible for quarterly earnings. And I don't want to get too off on this, but I think there's enough people out there who would agree it's rough that some of these companies just live and die by quarterly profits. If it affects people in a negative way, so be it. And that right now, I don't see that that's going to change, at least for 2 more years. So expect them to be kind of ruthless. Also, there's a competitive nature. The stakes of how we're competing with China only continue to go up.
Yeah.
Like right now, they're wondering, do they have access to Mythos? So our ability to compete, we'll get that pressure. I'm not expecting protection from the federal government level for those jobs. So as far as us learning how to be as diligent as we can about that spend will become part of someone's job, right? But for now, like, where did Agile come from as a recommendation? What came from developers? Why it helped their development? Same for AI, but there's a cost to it that we might know, but the others in your org don't know. So think about the different models and the versions. You can do a quick prompt, or we can put that prompt for all of you to run it yourself and take a look, because some of that could be the beginning of like, hey, it makes a lot more cost savings if we'd use this other model. Well, now someone in your org is going to listen to cost savings. If you simply say, we like an additional model too, because it does neat stuff that you won't understand if I explain it, that's probably going to not get a lot of traction. If you say, this will be X% cheaper, someone's going to listen to that. And that's going to push through to get approval for some tools that maybe you don't have right now. And I think that that's really significant. So keep that in mind, run through it, take a look at that, and maybe you just chip away. If pick your biggest disparity first. Wow, we shouldn't use Claude Opus for everything. Let's use Sonnet for this. It's easy, just change it. Or we shouldn't use not deep think, but the high level reasoning model for all the things. At least we teach people to change those settings. But if you find one is essentially, Gemini is going to be free for a lot of stuff. It's not great at everything. They're not using it for a lot of dev, but boy, you could use it for requirements. But my default that I'm seeing, Larry, is, as an IT shop, we're using Claude. So we have Claude do all those things. We have Claude do the requirements. We have Claude mock up some things. Claude's going to do the design. Claude does the coding. That might be the most expensive way to do everything. You buy a really nice car that can do all these things, but you're really just using it as your daily commuter, right? I have a Hummer just in case I ever need to go off-roading, but I'm using it as my daily commute and I only go off-roading. That's probably not the best. So consider that and then look for what we'll put up there to share with others for how to use that. Now, there's a good point you're making, Larry, about this idea of like assigning the roles. And I think that can kind of play in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. We've mentioned before, incorporate AI as a team member. Great, wonderful. But guess what? The next logical step is to assign your AI agent or agents a role. What is it that you want them to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And you could say you could hold them accountable for accomplishing that, but that's not the point. The point is here, we can hold ourselves accountable for using the AI agent for that role. So it kind of flips it around a little bit. The agent's going to always be, it's going to do what the agent does.
Oh, yeah.
But the whole point is that helps solidify how you use it and how you view the AI agent. So it's no more just a team member, but it's a team member with a specific role. And now everybody in your team knows, for these scenarios, I need to use my agent to create value. So keep that in mind. Yeah, assign your AI agent a role, not just incorporate him into your team as a team member.
Right. And I think that helps us picture what we're talking about, which is this is the architect, this is your security checker, this is right. So now we know we're going to use that. And if behind the scenes you simply set up that agent to use whatever model behind it, you've already built in that that's the smartest way we can spend our money. And your team doesn't have to overthink, oh, I'm doing a different task now. So I think it's really a great comment to make, Larry. Plus, you're going to just start to humanize it a little bit to think that person should be doing that thing. Also, we already know AI can hallucinate. So I've seen plenty of people set up the adversarial role to double check things, and literally down to in the prompt having the tone of don't trust what the other agent says, verify, and you could throw that to a higher reasoning model to make really sure. But you can even have them check themselves. It can be a human, but I've seen lots of people do really cool stuff like this agent generates it, this other agent pushes back and verifies that in all sorts of different ways. So even in those roles, you could set up someone's going to do something. Doesn't even have to be you all the time verifying. Another agent verifies it. But I like the idea. Give them names, make a persona bit out of it. So I think that's really important. Now, within that context I'm touching on, frame out the high level expectations. What do you want from the deliverable that the agent's going to do? The context that we're in, that's everything from the rigor for security, discipline and diligent we need to be on reviewing things. You can tell it to slow down, check its own work, give me the output to verify. There might be parts of that where you're giving it context. We wouldn't have to do that when you're using agent for creating design, for creating HTML pages maybe, but you would do it for security checks. So you can frame a lot on the attitude it takes in within that context, what it's supposed to do as a high level outcome. That's part of the benefit of agents is it's more about giving it a goal. It'll figure out how to do it within it. But boy, Larry and I have definitely learned the more context you give it, the better results you're going to get. I don't know if devs always really clock. That's going to put a lot of upfront time. You'll get the benefits later, but make sure you're doing that. And there's plenty of examples out there on the web of what that looks like to have these thorough ones. There's also plenty available on GitHub to build it in, whether that's through plugins. And you can get a running start by saying, what are they setting these up as and how those get used, and then apply those. I think that's a good place to start. And then depending on your SDLC, I know we're jumping right into development, But we've definitely learned what we could have taken a step back as a team is if we would have thought more about how it's to be used, what we're trying to accomplish. So a quick story there is one of our team members, she made something with Lovable more as like a prototype, see if we can do it. It looked great, but then we started to get into like, oh, we've got to now refine it. We're running the problems back to the cost issue, Larry. It's now starting to get costly. Either we got to upgrade or we got to wait a week or two to continue using it on the more affordable tier. And then it's like, well, why don't we just take all that code and shift it over to the Gemini, where we don't have those limitations on cost? Great. It does do a lot of things well. It's still struggling. We all know that Claude's probably better at dev, period, is my experience. Sorry, my Google friends, but that's just what I'm seeing. So now literally it is running in Google Cloud, but for changes now, what she's doing is she's going to Claude and saying, here's all the source code. I want to make a change like X, Y, and Z so that the app does these things. Claude gives an answer saying, change these modules in these ways. She goes back in the Gemini and puts in those changes. So even just in delivering the app, you can see that we went through this journey of, no, we can mock up something quickly and Lovable, making it truly work in the end within the cost. It made sense to move it to Gemini. Gemini's not the best at that, but it's the cheapest. So now we do targeted usage of Claude for fixes and things. And I got to say, I don't think you've seen it, Larry. It is the best work tracker app I've ever seen, all vibe coded and running in the cloud with security and logins through Google and all that. But back to that point, had we taken a step back and thought, do we have the context of what we're using, what the tools are good at? We wouldn't have had to find our way through all that, stumbling around in the dark, learning the hard way. But thankfully, on a small pilot project versus maybe some of you out there working on something very large and you realize like, oh my gosh, we painted ourselves into a corner. Because now we built all this stuff on a platform that's really, really expensive. Now we're going to have a challenge in there. So think about that. Do a little bit of pre-work, discovery around what apps are better. I don't say apps, but the AI, the tools like Lovable and Replit and N8N for some things, and then what you're going to use in the AI core models for the other parts. That upfront planning will save you a lot of time and cycles, frustration, confusion with a little bit of upfront work instead of defaulting to it's dev, so we use Claude for everything.
Exactly. I was thinking of something else, Scott. If you want to watch your costs, somebody's got to be responsible for it, right?
Woo!
Now, let's just take the example you just gave us. All of a sudden, one solution is becoming too expensive.
Yeah.
So what do? Okay, so you got to have somebody, especially when you have AI agents running, it's the problem you've just described on steroids. So you have to have somebody watching that token count.
Yes.
And then you report that token count on your stand-ups. Go ahead. I know it's not in the Scrum guide. Fine. It probably never will be, but that's not the point. The point is the team's got to know. Okay, we burned through X amount of tokens using this particular AI agent. So we've got 5 tokens left.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do, team? so that way you keep yourself out of hot water. And if I can loop back to something you said earlier about, okay, using multiple agents for various reasons. Let's just say, for example, you do want to use multiple agents, and let's just assume your company's even going to allow that. Then you take these agents and you assign each of these agents a role. So everybody on your team knows if I'm going to do this task, then I use this agent because that's their role and so on. That is going to save money, but you just don't leave it out there in the ether for someone to figure out. You're constantly reporting back every day, this is our token count. Yeah. And then you can even iterate on this thing. So your teams are brilliant. I don't need to tell you that, right? As a Scrum Master or a coach, and you've worked with teams, it is just incredible the solutions your teams come up with if you give them a chance. Report your token count and then bring it into your retrospectives and say, oh, what can we do to more wisely use the tokens that we have? Just make it a permanent conversation in your retrospectives, and your teams are going to come up with great ideas. So that's another super big price saving. Not only that, but you get the whole team involved in the conversation.
Right. And my friends that might think, what's Larry talking about? What did he drink for his afternoon wake up? Sincerely, do we not do the same thing when you're watching someone at the daily stand-up say, still working on, and you're kind of thinking like, but that's just a typo. Why is this like 3 days? Because in your mind, it shouldn't be that hard, i.e. it shouldn't cost this much. So if people are cranking out, now the thing is with AI, you can't see that. But what we're trying to do, just like a great principle from Agile is, you're trying to make that visible. It is a cost. There's also, I think, a cost of lost opportunity, because we could have been cranking on something else instead of have the agent burn through something that wasn't the right way to be approaching that. But we're not making that visible in the daily scrums. And so it really is like some person spinning their wheels on something that's now costing way too much. And we're essentially not going to deliver what we could have because we inordinately spent way too much time on something else, right? Which is essentially what the tokens would be doing. We burned true cost. Just think in terms of people's salaries as tokens. There's levels of things. Your architect is more expensive than your junior dev, and you wouldn't want them mismatched. We talked about that. But you also would be really surprised if someone's way overclocking on a task, because you're not going to deliver other things now. Essentially, you burned up your fixed budget in Scrum. You burned it up on something you shouldn't have. To Larry's point, we should be making that visible, because it is a burn rate. Well, actually, probably the better metaphor, Larry, is you have offshore resources just cranking away on stuff. And that's the stuff that would surprise you. Like the whole 2 weeks, that's what they did, right? It'd be the same thing on token usage. Like, you did what? The whole day was burning out. There's all of our tokens for for the sprint or whatever. So I think it's great to look for it. You could look for volunteers, find some way to say, at least we need to have this conversation. My friends, we have a fiduciary duty to maximize value back to the business. Now, normally that's engineering costs, because usually IT is your most expensive employees, given salaries. Well, boy, when Larry's talking about these surprise bills, now it's AI assisted development. These agents and platforms could be your biggest bill, but we have no insight in how we're using them. So I think that's a great point, Larry, on that. We did talk through matching the right task for that. That should be a more straightforward one. I know some of that can be obviously done through orchestration. So if you're at that level, great, you can kind of set that up. We talked about using setting problems like personas, give them names, give them roles. You could set the models up by that. So there's some things you could do that are actually fairly straightforward that automatically, yes, we're not watching token count daily, but we have given some thought to how we're using the models and the cost. And our default SDLC now is like, they're pretty much well assigned. So could it get out of control? Yes, but we at least set some guardrails to say we're using it intelligently. Now you can layer on what Larry's saying. Where do we get our readout, right? And there's some simple way we can just put that information back in front of that. In the end, I'll come back around, Larry, to what we kind of started with, which is this whole industry is obviously growing. This industry is going to be looking to monetize even more. There are some expenses that are just no getting around. The data centers are expensive. Energy is expensive. There's no getting around some of that. They're going to have to get that money recouped somehow. We're already paying for it. We're going to pay for more and more. But I think there's some point, and a little bit like what happened with cloud is, hey, if they change their pricing model and you're not watching it, and so your bills went way up, that's on you. That's not on them. And don't tell me that they're not some smart people thinking, if we do it this way, no one's going to maybe notice as much, right? I would be counting on it, Larry. So be diligent on that, because you owe it to your corporation. You guys are building software, hopefully for a certain cost that they thought was reasonable to get the value out of it. If we end up building that same thing for them that was at 3 times the cost, just because AI tokens went up, and you're like, I don't know, yeah, Claude changed the pricing model, right? But you're still giving the same answers if you said, yeah, we just didn't design it well and we had to do a ton of rework, and right, yeah, so sorry, it cost 3 times as much. You wouldn't feel good about that. But usage of AI is under your purview in IT as a developer. It's not under anyone else's purview. So we're trusting your intelligence that not only do you know the power of AI and what it can do, you're aware of the costs and that finesse. Might not be your passion around, I love looking at costs of things with AI, but if not you, then who else? And maybe there is, who's going to watch over this? Put a name in that blank, at least temporarily, and see where that can go. And maybe it's not necessarily someone on the team, but someone somewhere, or at least you raise the flag saying, we know, we're aware that we need to figure out. Because I'd much rather be told as a CFO, hey, cost models are changing on what we're doing. We're trying to figure it out. I'll take that when I get the surprise bill, like, they warned me though, versus like, what the heck is this? No one told me that this was going to happen. And they're going to be mad at you and blame you in IT for messing up their budgeting and all the costs that they had figured out, right? And I think it's a good bit of leadership as well to be, moving forward to what will soon become, Larry, our new world. So really glad you brought this up. I know there's a lot to this. Look for more on this topic. So I think we're going to be fleshing it out ourselves. Like, what does this really look like? What tools could we give that would be helpful to kind of lead that conversation? What does the new world of AI development look like, with still trying to keep agility and those principles that we really, really value? So stay tuned on that one. And we hope to see everyone again soon. And thanks for listening. And if you have any questions around any of this or things that would be helpful, please leave those in the comments. We actually do read those. We do look at them and happy to add more, either more content, answer the questions, point in the right direction, whatever we can do to help. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.